Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 16 Environmental and Ecological Movements. Let us have introduction about the unit. Environmental and ecological movements are among the important examples of collective actions of several social groups. Protection and recognition of constitutional and democratic rights which are not defined by law but form an important part of the day-to-day living of the subterranean masses, like the control over their resources, the right of indigenous people to preserve their culture, protection of environment, and maintenance of ecological balance are significant concerns of these movements as they affect the human life to a great extent. These movements also reflect an enlarged vision of economic and politics. Economic justice sought by these movements does not mean mere distribution of resources, but encompass a large vision like enhancement in the quality of life through recognition of people's right over their natural resources, their right to live with dignity, and their participation in the decision making. The concerns of human environment received specular attention of scholars following the conclusion of the United Nations Conference on Human Environment, Stockholm in 1972. By the 1980s, the Green Movement became a worldwide phenomenon, encompassing various countries of the world, including India. It is signified by several movements of people for the protection of their environmental and ecological rights in India, eco greens or green movements in Germany and North America. In this unit, our focus will be on environmental and ecological movements. While agrarian or working class movements have had a long historical trajectory, environmental and ecological movement gained worldwide attention only in the second half of the 20th century. These movements focus not only on basic survival issues but also on larger ecological concerns. These are different from earlier social movements, and there is need to understand them in terms of their nature and strategies. It may be mentioned here that scholars have tried to understand and analyze these movements in diverse ways. In general, these movements are grouped under tribal and peasant movements and as well under new social movements. This is so because ecological aspects are generally associated with peasant and tribals whose survival is associated with the state of natural resources like forest, water, etc. Some treat them as middle class and elite movement as the problems and concerns of local communities. Indigenous people or non-tribal poor are generally articulated by the urban middle class elite. In fact, there has been no single unified and homogeneous environmental discourse in India. There has been what Guha calls varieties of environmentalism. In this context, the present unit attempts to understand history of environmental movements in India. Different environmental and ecological movements will also be dealt in this unit. Now, the next point is environmental movements in India, issues and concerns. The environmental movement is a broad generic term which is generally used to describe and understand different types of local struggles and conflicts concerned with livelihood issues and ecological security within the large context of development debate. These struggles, in fact, critiqued and questioned the notion of development and conservation ecological pursuit by the Indian state and its official since colonial time. The genesis of the environmental movement in India can be traced to the Chipko movement 1973 in Garhwal region in the new state of Uttaranchal. In fact, between 1970s and 80s, there were several struggles in India around issues of rights to forest and water, which raised larger ecological concerns like rights of communities in forest resources, sustainability of large scale environmental projects like dams, issues of displacement and rehabilitation, etc. The Indian environmental movement is critical of the colonial model of development pursued by the post colonial state. The post independent state failed to build up a development agenda based on the needs of the people and continued to advocate the modern capitalist agenda, which led to the destruction of environment, poverty, and marginalization of rural communities. Formation of national parks, sanctuaries, protected areas in India, in fact, represents the conventional environmentalism which the Indian state advocated with the aim of preserving wildlife and biodiversity by pushing people out of these areas. In response to this conventional environmentalism, which considered the Indian state to be the custodian of natural resources, the environmental movement in India advocated the ideology of environmentalism of the poor. It, is, it not only criticized modern developmentism but also strongly advocated the revival of traditional self-sufficient village economy. It brought communities to the center stage of Indian environmental discourse. The environmentalists stated that the local communities were best suited to conserve natural resources as their survival depended on the sustainable use of such resources. They argued that in order to make the sustainable use of resource, the customary rights or traditional rights should be given back to the people, which were taken away by the state, and traditional institutions should also be recognized. In a nutshell, the environmental movement in India concentrates on the issue of equality in relation to across access and use of natural resources. Unlike in the West, a significant characteristic of environmental movement in India is that they have mainly involved the women, the poor, and disadvantaged masses who have been directly affected by or are victims of environmental degradation. Thus, these movements are primarily political expressions of the struggle of local communities and people who are victims of environmental degradation or abuse of resources. Gadgil and Guha identify four broad strands within the environmental movements in India based on vision, ideology, and strategy. The first type are those which emphasize on the moral necessity to restrain overuse and ensure justice to the poor and marginalized. Mainly Gandhian belong to this strand. The second strand stresses on the need to dismantle the unjust social order through struggle. Marxists mostly follow this strand. The third and fourth strands advocate reconstruction, that is, employing technology appropriate to the given context and time. They reflect the concerns of the scientist or the spontaneous efforts of the communities at the village level who aim at protecting local community forests or the right to pursue environment friendly agricultural practices. Before we discuss some examples of environmental and ecological movements in India, it will be relevant to reproduce from Ghanshyam Shah book Social Movements a review of literature. This will help us to have an overview of the issues, categories, and examples of environmental movements which have taken place in India. The first is forest and land based issues are right of access to forest resources, non commercial use of natural resources, prevention of land degradation, social justice, or human rights. Some examples are Chipko, Apico, tribal movements all over the country. For example, Jharkhand, Bastar belt. The next is marine resources and fisheries aquaculture. Issues are ban on trawling, preventing commercialization of shrimp and prawn culture, protection of marine resources, implementation of coastal zone regulations, and examples are National Fishermen's Forum working for traditional fisher folks on Kerala, Chilika, Bachao Andolan, Orissa. The next is industrial pollution, and issues are stricter pollution control measures, compensation, prevention of reckless expansion of industries without considering design, locational factors, and livelihood issues of local population. And examples are Jairo Gas Morka in Bhopal, Ganga Mukti Andolan in Bihar, movement against Harihar Pole Fiber Factory in Karnataka, movement against pollution of Son River by Gwalior Rayon Factory led by Bidush Karkhan Group of Shahadol District, MP. movements against poisoning of Chaliyar River in Kerala by Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad. The next is development projects, dams and irrigation projects. Issues are protection of tropical forest, ecological balance, destructive development, rehabilitation and resettlement of the displaced. And some examples are Silent Valley Movement by KSSP, Narmada Bachao Andolan Movement against Tehri by Tehri Band Birodhi Samiti, the Kosi, Gandak, Bodhghat and Bethi, Bhopal, Patnam and Chambali in the west and Tungbhadra, Malapatra and Ghat Prabha schemes in the South Koyana project affected committee. And next is power projects. Issues are ecological balance, rehabilitation and resettlement high costs. And examples are Jan Andolan in Dabhol against Andron, Kyokaro Jan Sangatana in Bihar, anti-mine project in Doon Valley. And next is mining, and issues are depletion of natural resources. And example is anti-bauxite mine movement, Balco project in Orissa. And next is industrial plants or railway projects or airport projects. Issues are land degradation, ecological imbalance, realignment, rehabilitation, and resettlement of the displaced, ecological balance. And examples are protest and demands of Kakhana Railway Realignment Action Committee, citizens group against DuPont Nylon, Goa Amravati Bachao Abhiyan against a large chemical complex. And next is military bases. Issues are ecological balance, rehabilitation, resettlement, and safety. And examples are anti-missiles test range in Balipal and at Natrhat, Bihar. Next is wildlife sanctuaries in national parks. Issues are displacement, rehabilitation and resettlement, loss of livelihood. And example are Ekjut in Bhim Shankara region of Maharashtra, Shramik Mukti Andolan in Sanjay Gandhi National Park, Bombay. Next is tourism. Issues are displacement, cultural changes, social ills. And examples are Himachal Bachao Andolan, Balanchro Sad, Goa. Next is advocacy groups, individual campaigns, citizens action group. And issues are policy inputs, striker measures for protected areas, clear policy on national park and wildlife sanctuaries, lobbying, research, training, and documentation on wildlife conservation, education, community based environmental management, publications on environmental issues. And examples are Society for Clean Cities, Bombay, Natural History Society, Center for Science and Environment, Delhi, research, training, and documentation organizations such as Bombay Environmental Action Group, Save Bombay Committee, Save Pune Citizens Committee, etc. And the last is appropriate technology or organic farming. Issues are international debates, sustainable development, eco friendly models of development, low cost environmental friendly housing, and technology. And examples are Raleigh City, Anna Hazare's village, SOP, ECOMM, Laurie Baker's housing experiments, People's Science Institute, Dehradun. Here we want to wind up this lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.